Episode 4 of the Green Planet is called Desert Worlds, and this obviously features plants that are found in the desert. So you wouldn't expect there to be a lot of plants in the desert because, it's the desert. But no, this episode has a surprising amount of plants in it. And this episode opens up with this desert in the north of China, not a desert I'm familiar with, to be honest. And here we see there's loads of these poplar trees, Euphrates poplar, I think they're called. And it's quite weird to see because they look just like, normal deciduous trees. And there is a proper, mini forest of them there. It's very weird to look at them in a desert, and that kind of sets you up for the tone of the rest of the episode, because this episode's got quite a lot of weird plants in it. I mean, you think the last one was pretty weird. This one has a lot of weird shit in it. It's a good way of opening the episode and a good way of easing you into what the rest of the episode's going to be like. And we open up in the deserts of Arizona, North America, and we see that obviously it's pretty barren. There's all these seeds underground, and when the rains do come, it creates a bloom. There's all these flowers everywhere. It's really cool, and you see that across the world. All the deserts around the world, they pretty much all have the same thing. It's a thing I think we're all pretty aware of, but it's obviously cool to see it, and it's an important thing to talk about in an episode about desert plants. And we spend quite a bit of time talking about cactus. Obviously, they're the most famous of the desert plants, so that was obviously an important thing to do. Saguaro cactuses get the bulk of the screen time, I think, at the start of the episode, and I mean, that's fair enough because they're the most iconic types of cactus, and they look pretty cool. They do highlight how they grow. They basically use these nurse trees called mesquite trees. They basically grow in the shade of them, because otherwise they'd compete with other cacti, and they're actually essential in the growth of these cactus. And you see all these cactus, they're pretty massive, they're pretty impressive structures, but in the shadow of them all, they've all got like a little mesquite tree, and that does become important towards the end of the episode as well. But yeah, that's a pretty interesting thing, because obviously cactus are a pretty iconic desert plant. We all know what they look like, especially saguaro cactus, but it was cool to add another dimension to show that other plants are essential to their growth, because you just think they're just, the ultimate desert survivor, but actually not the case. They actually do need other plants to help them out, so that's actually pretty interesting. And on the theme of cacti, we talk about various other species to some degree. The cholla cactus we speak about quite a bit, and this is probably the cactus you want to run into the least. We get a really good sequence of Attenborough basically putting on a glove and putting his hand into it, and it's so jaggy that it penetrates the glove, and he's in clearly some amount of pain, but while he's still delivering the lines, it's quite good. It does harken back to a lot of the old Attenborough documentaries when he was a lot younger and he was able to be in shot a lot of the time with various animals and plants, because that's the sort of thing that would happen. He would obviously be reacting live, whether he was surprised, scared, or just in pain. He was having to deliver his lines, and he did a pretty good job, to be fair. He still is professional now, or at least he was in 2022 when this came out. So that was a good sequence, and I just had a bit of a smile on my face throughout that. I thought that was quite nice. And while we're with the cholla cactus, we see the bits of it drop off. Basically, that's how cacti reproduce, but it's still got to move away from its parent, otherwise it's just going to compete with it. And it relies on a pack rat. This pack rat will carry it away and actually uses it to fortify its own den against rattlesnakes, which is quite interesting. And the whole time I was on the pack rat's side, but it's not actually ideal for the cactus to be taken by it, because obviously, while it's got to be moved, it doesn't want to be competing with loads of other cacti around the same little rat den. So I actually turned from being on the rat side to the cactus's side. No, this is a series about plants. We're on their side, back to the cactus, and we see the wind comes and blows it away, and it's able to get to its own space. So a combination of the rat and the wind have helped this cacti out. Quite good. Again, more interesting stuff. Also on the theme of cacti, we see this thing called Tristerix, which is a type of mistletoe. Basically, in the Atacama Desert, it basically travels in the digestive tract of birds, which then shit on cactus, and the Tristerix is able to penetrate into the cacti and manipulate its way into the systems of the cactus, and eventually it'll emerge a year later just bursting out the cactus in flower. That was interesting. Again, it was nice seeing parasitic plants. We've seen a lot of them in this series. This was also cool because it's one I hadn't heard of before. And then we move to South Africa, and here we start talking about succulents. And one we focus on in particular is the stone plant, which looks like a little pebble. Like, it doesn't look like a plant at all, which is kind of the point. So animals will leave it alone. When rains come, it'll get slightly bigger, but it'll still look like a pebble. And eventually it will flower for a brief period of time, and that's basically its life cycle. Another interesting plant. Again, another weird one. Looks pretty weird. Doesn't look like a plant at all. Pretty cool, I thought. Also in South Africa is Stipelia, which is another flower that basically imitates dead flesh. It looks pretty minging. It's got these bloated, flowers that come off it, and they basically attract flies. Similar to what we've seen before in previous episodes. We see the flies, they arrive at the plant, they get a bit of pollen stuck on them, they transfer it to another plant. Nothing we haven't seen before. It is still interesting because it's not a plant you'd ever really see, but, it's kind of the same thing we saw in the first episode, so, that is, a little bit repetitive. Then we go back to North America, and here we talk about creosote. So creosote are this really, really slow-growing plant, and Attenborough, in a pretty cool sequence, one of the most memorable ones. I mean, there isn't a lot from this series that I do remember years later, apart from the, battles between the different plants. This is one of the sequences I do, though, because we basically see Attenborough in this big creosote bush, and he talks about how slow growing it is. And to illustrate that, we revisit footage from 1982 that I think was filmed for The Living Planet, I guess, of Attenborough in the same bush, talking about them and basically saying the same thing. And we cut to today, and it's barely grown an inch. Like, it's Pretty impressive how slow growing it is. That was good. A great, great way of illustrating that. I think that probably one of the best examples in the series, I thought. And it's again, it's always nice to see Amber when he's younger. Then we get the resurrection plant, which is this little plant, kind of like tumbleweed, that basically is dormant in the desert. It looks dead. Then the wind will blow it away eventually, and then it'll get some water and it'll, flourish. Again, it was good to talk about. I think it was still important to talk about. Even kind of more obvious examples need to be talked about, I think. So, that was good. Then we see that when the soil gets really dry, it cracks. And that allows these seeds that are buried deep down to finally emerge and get their time in the sun. We see that as the case for the coyote tobacco plant, which is interesting because tobacco is, a pretty famous plant, not for the sake of it being a plant, more because, people smoke it. I can't say I've seen much of tobacco plants before or since. So that was actually pretty interesting to talk about. They're pollinated by moths, which unfortunately lay their eggs on the plants, so caterpillars are having a feast on them, but they're able to send chemical messages around the plants to spread nicotine, which not only deters the caterpillars, but also makes them quite obvious to other predators like lizards and birds, which is quite cool. And Amber puts a leaf under like a UV to show you the chemical messages going around the leaves of the plant. And then we talk about wind. Wind's very important for spreading seeds around the desert, and we see the extent that wind can actually take things. We see these giant cardone cactus off this little island off the coast of North America, I guess, and they're, pretty big and pretty impressive. They don't grow as big as they do in the mainland, weirdly. And they talk about that in the diaries. It's probably because there's so much wind there that if they're any taller, they'll just get blown over. But they're also a lot thicker than they are on the mainland. They've basically got a symbiotic relationship with booby birds, which will nest underneath the cactus to protect them from the sun, but their guano will also fertilize the cactus, so everyone's a winner. And then we start to tie things up with the baobabs. Baobabs in Africa, again, another really iconic plant, and we see that they're pretty important for a lot of animals, especially elephants. The elephants will feed on the bark of the baobab. Because there's a lot of water in there, so when it's dry, it's handy to have that lifeline, which is normally fine for the baobab because it can bounce back. However, because of climate change, elephants are having to feed on them more frequently and take more baobab than they would normally do. So a lot of the baobabs are actually dying because of this. It's kind of a sad moment. And then we kind of tie things off with a more upbeat moment where we go back to North America. We see the saguaro cactus again, and we see this saguaro cactus were pretty widespread before, but not so much now. Because people used to log the mesquite trees for firewood, obviously that's a lifeline for these cactus, so there's nowhere near as many of them. However, now we understand the relationship between the cacti and the mesquite trees, so they're now protected, which has allowed the saguaro cactus to bounce back. It's all good. It's a nice positive way of ending the episode. And then we get the diaries. It's all about the people filming the giant cardones on that island. It's fine. I mean, it's cool watching the guy that studied them for years. It's a cool sequence again. It's nice, perfectly fine. So yeah, this episode is pretty good. It's a good episode, I think. Highlights for me were probably Abra and the creosote. I also liked all the stuff with the cacti, the stone plants. I mean, there's a lot of good stuff in here. It's a pretty good episode. So yeah, let me know in the comments below what you thought of this episode. What were your highlights? Let me know. Next week I'll be doing the last one of the series, which is all about cities, or urban environments rather. So look forward to that. And as ever, feel free to like, comment, and subscribe, or don't if you don't want to. It's perfectly fine. And I'll see you next time, and goodbye.